if you produce it, you say yes, malpractice, because it's a privileged document. Work product privilege or and attorney-client. Okay. Okay. Right. Yes. The answer is probably yes. Work product of a consultant is protected if it's in anticipation of the litigation, and the best site for that is that I was able to find was just the rules of civil procedure about what. Right. So if you're investigating a violation of your license, I think that's close enough to anticipation of litigation. But you're right that you need to be thinking down the road. There might be a lawsuit, and wow, we've come across this violation. We might want to file a suit. Let's investigate. Then
So if it were a potential license violator investigating a compliance issue, I'm not sure
that the work product.
Facts would be the same.
Well, right. Well, it may not be a work product issue. It may be some other issue. But here, this is directed at work product. Okay. So team two. Yes. All right, team 2, you have the board. 100. Okay. You're admitted in State A and provide pro bono services to an open source project whose developers are based in State A. You meet with the steering committee at a conference in State B and provide legal advice. Malpractice. Any buzzers? No. Any thoughts on why? So that's essentially the right answer. Rule 5.5c provides that you can provide temporary legal services outside of the jurisdiction if it arises in your in-jurisdiction practice. The developers were all in State A. You're in State A. They're like, hey, let's go meet at a coffee shop in State B or whatever. You meet with them there and you provide legal service. That's definitely arising outside of your State A practice, and you're advising them.
It may not be very realistic in an open source project setting, but straightforward.
Yeah. Okay. So team 2, you have the board. Team 3, sorry, I did this and then I'm sorry. Team 3, you have the board. Privilege for 200. Okay. Your in-house counsel at Black Shoe Incorporated tasked with investigating a potential GPL violation. You task a Black Shoe developer with the investigation. After Black Shoe files suit, you produce her investigation-related documents. Malpractice. Yes.
No, this is your own document. I don't understand the question. You're producing to the other part. You're producing your own materials, all materials.
Right. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase the question a little bit better. You're producing the document. Was the document privileged or not? In other words, you made a call about whether it was privileged. You said it's not privileged. You produce it. Were you right or wrong? Was it
your own document? So it's your own.
Let's say somebody else in Black Shoe Incorporated. Yeah. I love lawyers. This is fantastic. It's like, okay. Yeah. Yes, the facts inform the final legal analysis. So, you're not in-house counsel.
So if you're in-house counsel, it's not.
Well, I mean, if you've retained outside counsel for the purpose of performing some kind of investigation about a potential violation, I think that's farther down the road to you're seeking legal advice about a violation. And here, I mean, it's a similar situation, but with an in-house counsel, the line is typically blurred a little bit more. So, yeah. Right. Well. So. Right. So yeah. So I actually, I come down here with a probably, the federal rules of civil procedure also, there's a specific carve out, in-house documents, for purposes of informing the litigation. So, I think it's a similar analysis to the one we performed before about work product, although, slightly different twist.
I don't know if it was so clear from the question that this was in anticipation of litigation.
Yeah.
Compared to the previous.
Well,
right.
I think where I was being challenged with it, I would have said yes, probably privilege,
Yeah.
but since you're the one producing
Right.
you're waiving.
You can waive your own privilege, right? Yes, of course. Yes, and that is a good point. Maybe we should award points over there for great discussion around this
Who wins
issue.
that one?
It's the corporate. I think what Louis was saying, he's the in-house lawyer for the corporation and is waiving it on behalf of the corporation. I think, is that? Right. Yeah. Of course. Okay. Let's see. That was team one. So team one has the board. Team one? Anyone?
Lawyer and client, 300. Big money.
Project Awesome launches a crowdfunding campaign to directly pay your fees. The money from the campaign is deposited directly into your account. It's paid directly to you by check, and you deposit it into your account.
My client's money?
The one? No, it's
My
your personal account.
Yes.
To directly pay your fees.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We had this exact question. So people say yes, malpractice. Okay. All right. So I think we said no. Because the question is, is it payment? I think the question is this payment for, fees that are going to be in the future, fees that have already been incurred? I think is the issue with a trust account or not.
The issue that we were focused on is payment from a third party, not your client. Is that raising ethical? Accepting payment from a third party, non-client, for work for a client, does that raise an ethical issue? On that narrow question, no.
Yes.
But if you want to bring in facts about like what account it was deposited into,
or whether or not the fees have already been incurred. So if it's like, you haven't done any work for them and you're like, give me $1 million, and, they, yeah, exactly, and you buy a house with it and you don't know what's going on, that's a little different than the situation where, you've incurred, $50,000 worth of fees and a crowdfunding campaign has been launched to, pay your fees. So these are the Rule 1.8F sets out when you'd want to do that. So we're going to we're not going to take away points, right? We're going to award no points for focusing on a separate issue. This is a head fake question. Okay, who had the board before? Was it team one? Team one.
Counselor, clients, and others for 100.
All right. Two sides of a forked project, neither of them clients of yours, dispute rights to the project name. You accept their request to help them resolve the dispute. Malpractice? Okay, so who's...
represent them both.
All right. No, it's not malpractice. Yes, you can do it. Rule 2.4, if the two, the 2.4 says basically you can act as a mediator, which is what everybody resolved to. But if they're unrepresented, you need to explain to them that you're not their attorney and, that you're, there's no attorney-client privilege. And so that's kind of, if this situation arises, that's kind of best practice.
Is that true for anything? Like, if it happens in mediation, there's no privilege for it?
Well, there can be agreements,
Like a confidentiality
agreement in the mediation, and that's a contractual thing not supported by a court order, but that's...
Yeah, I wonder if you got sued by a third party, then
It would be whatever the contract says, I mean, yes, you've been subpoenaed, but typically, or in my experience in litigation, when you have these type of agreements, you'll typically say like, you need to notify the other party, and the other party can go and try to squash it and that kind of thing. Anything else on that? I'm going to award points to Team 3, which is the back team. Team 3 for that one. Okay, so Team 3 has the board. Oh. All right. I should have been. There are no daily doubles in this game. Maybe next year we'll throw in a daily double. Okay. The Free Patchy Software Foundation invites you to participate in a committee to draft Free Patchy v3, which will consider changes to the patent license that could benefit your client who contributes many projects under the Free Patchy v2, which is a license in this. Free Patchy v3 and Free Patchy 2 are licenses. You agree to participate. Is this malpractice? Lewis.
Not malpractice.
Committing ethical violence. Okay. Any contrary views? An antitrust. Well, like who is in the software foundation? Yeah.
It's just that like Free Patchy has to know that you represent the client. You're representing the client's interest. As long as they know that.
Well, the question doesn't say you're representing their interests, right? It just says that the changes might benefit your client. Okay, so no. So this is actually explicitly permitted by the rule. It permits this sort of participation in law reform activities. I think that this falls into the area of kind of legal reform. You think about if you harken back to the UCC days. There were lawyers all working together to write the UCC back in the 20s or 30s or whenever that was done.
I think that the interesting question there is this really law reform activity?
Yeah.
The way that's contemplated by that rule. That we're talking about drafting a private, what traditional lawyers would analyze as a private legal agreement. But I mean, in open source and free software, these licenses pretty much function as sort of quasi-regulatory kind of instruments. So I think it's a good argument that this would be sort of law reform. Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's not unlike, drafting a new kind of piece of model legislation that then has to get adopted by legislatures. So I'm not sure that that's so different.
Even if we fall outside of the rules explain more explicitly, though, would it be a problem then?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, as long you're disclosing that you've been at this is it's kind of like the purpose of the rule is to make it so that, or according to the class, the purpose of the rule is so that lawyers can have free discourse about what the law or the rights and responsibilities ought to be in a certain arena, and you shouldn't be hindered by the fact that reforming the law, reforming the activities that industry standards would be beneficial to your clients. You should still be able to participate, but you shouldn't be able to go in, and this is important. You need to disclose that if you're advocating for change, this will materially impact some of my clients. Okay. All right. So I think did Team 1 answer that correctly? We kind of went around. Yes. All right. So Team 1 has the board. Wow. Okay. You are in-house counsel to a company running an open source project with a contributor license agreement requirement. You answer some questions on IRC from a potential contributor about interpretation of the contributor license agreement. To your knowledge, the contributor has no lawyer. raise your hand, answer the question, and say what you're assuming is what is. Well, say assuming. Go ahead. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah. Okay. I kind of, yeah, probably not. You know, you must make sure that they're representing the company behind the project and not the developer. You know, the way that I like to think about this is, you know, if the person is unrepresented, right? So you need to tell them, you know, I'm a lawyer, I'm representing the other side. But then you need to have a conversation with them about you know, what's going on. And if they were represented, you'd say to the other lawyer, look, you know, the way I see the agreement is X, Y, and Z. Just because they're not represented doesn't mean that you can't, you know, have a frank conversation with them about the rights and responsibilities that, you know, you intend from the contributor license agreement. You just need to be a little bit more careful because, you know, you're an attorney and you're not representing them, and you don't want there to be a misconception that you are representing them. Okay, so that goes to team 3. Big money. Okay, team 3 has the board. Wow. You throw a client advice memorandum up on your website at a non-indexed, non-linked to URL and send the client the link instead of emailing them directly. Malpractice. We have a definite yes, definite yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Let's. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's say that you've taken measures, proactive measures to make it so it wasn't. Well, yes. Okay. Yes. We're kind of that's. Right. Okay. All right. I think we've danced around this long enough. The answer is all of your instincts are correct. The question is, have you been? It depends. And the question is, have you been reasonable or not in your use of electronic means to protect privilege? And, yeah. Well, want to split it? I mean, I think that they started and you jumped it.
We can't really easily divide by
250, 250?
Oh, sorry, two.
Okay. Richard's the final arbiter of all things. So Richard,
I'm going to split it between two and three.
he's splitting.
I'm just curious about the comment. Somebody said that they don't see the big difference in sending a plain text email, which is anywhere. Oh, anywhere. Yeah. Why? Because that's like so common, right? With lawyers and their clients, they just shoot each other.
Yeah.
for legal communication with clients. Yeah, but I think I think there's been my sense is there's sort of a move away from that, as I guess became more common for services like Gmail to be used by lawyers in private practice. I mean, I think probably the answer is that it depends, but maybe a bad idea.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, I mean, I would try to make it so your communications with your clients are secure and not, discoverable by someone going to your website and, typing in random, characters into the whoa, that's interesting. Okay. So, well, we split. Did we split on that? Okay, so why don't we do a score check, and whoever has less can choose the next.
Pretty clear that 2 has less than 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so team 2.
Yeah, I'll take Lori Client 500.
Okay. Okay, a large group of developers is anarchistically working on Project Awesome. The 2 main developers ask, and you agree, to file a trademark, Awesome. A 3rd main developer instructs you to abandon the mark, and you refuse. Malpractice. Say again? You can, if you have questions, you can answer the question and say what you're assuming your assumptions are. I have a limited amount of space here on the slide, so I can't give it. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, okay.
My first, but I deal with a lot of the IT created and all that. So the first thing I would say is just because 2 have hired you, that doesn't trump the rights of that 3rd developer. And I don't know trademark as well as I know copyright, but in copyright, that's called joint authorship is an inseparable marriage, right? So after 2 people hire the lawyer, you can't divorce out of the process. So that's the case with trademark as well. It sounds like you can't jettison a 3rd off.
Karen, did you want to respond to that?
Well, so I don't want to get into the copyright trademark privilege. I think we're going to get into that, but I was going to say like obviously easier for like Ed when you agree with the 2 main developers to be the very focused on the forum of the project, saying that your credit is going to mark. I'm just saying that maybe you did that because that's what one would do in this situation, and you left a certain number of weeks of a notice period for people to discuss, where there was a discussion and a leading into a very obvious documented consensus that that is the case. So when the 3rd main developer instructs you to amend the mark and refuse, even if already this project governance process has already happened, and therefore like you have to automatically have the right to
Another more. There's more. Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to respond or?
I want to challenge what anarchistically
I just mean. Well, I could have said a group of developers is working as an unincorporated association, but that's a little more boring. Go ahead.
So definitely kind of a Karen type follow-up question is like, so in this case, are these 2 people, are they representing the project? Does there need to be a project corporation, or is that corporation like a legal entity for the project in order for you to file it on behalf of them? Like, how does that work?
Right.
By the way, Pam Chestek has actually written articles on this.
Oh yeah. So let's hear it, Pam.
The question is controversial because you would not have filed an application. The owner, only the owner of a trademark application even filed for to file the application for it. So you would have had to have solved this problem
Okay.
before you ever filed a trademark application. Now, admittedly, maybe you don't do that.
Okay. So this is a lawyer who has done that.
Well, I think if I had done this, it's hard for me to read this document, because I wouldn't do it, because I would have said, because exactly the question is, what is the entity I'm representing? Am I representing a solo? I represent a partnership. There
So there's a lot of, I mean, anarchistically is a very, is there some kind of like, general project guidelines? I mean, all these are important questions, and I think we've hit all the different kind of assumptions that we could make about this. I mean, so I think the real answer is who's the client. It depends. It's permissible to represent an unincorporated association. Perhaps that's kind of what this question was driving at. I think that Karen raised some really important points about how do you make sure when if some developers say like, hey, we're this project, how do you make sure that they really are and they really have the rights to that trademark? As Pam said, there is somebody who owns that mark. That mark is being used in commerce by something. What is that thing? What is its structure? Who makes the decisions for it? And figuring that out is an important and difficult task in this space.
So a project governance issue is kind of lurking behind this question from the client. And you probably don't. Well, so to go into Karen's point, you may want to have it would be a good idea for the project to kind of figure out that governance question first, and that will then sort of shape who the client is that's sort of seeking legal advice on this trademark question.
But I think Karen's also saying that like there are representations you make when you file a trademark, and I think yeah. So maybe both. Yeah. So another concern is the duty to investigate, what the actual ownership is before you. Okay. Scorekeeper, who's next? Team 3. Okay. Yeah. Which is the point, and Team 3 has been growing massively well. Because being in the back. Yeah. 400. Okay. You're an in-house lawyer. During a source code audit, you learn that your company is using complicated and valuable source code written by a friend that is licensed under the GPL. Your company is not complying with the license. You tell your friend.
Can't believe that's 400.
You'd be amazed at how hard it is to rearrange these slides. So I think it was, yeah. Okay, so no exception applies. So yes, everybody's instinct was right. This was a clear-cut one. Who did we hear first, Richard? I saw. I'm gonna reward raising the hand and screaming no versus just sitting in the front and screaming no, which is what Andrew did. So team 1 gets the point. So you have the board. Maybe we should go for a score just so we know where we stand. With
Team 1 has 1100. Team 2 has 350. Team team 3 has about 1650 if I added that up right.
Need a big comeback.
All right. So wait, the team 1, you have the board, I think. 400. You advised Unicorn, a former client, regarding administering Project Awesome, a free software project. Mr. Fontana seeks and you provide advice on how to contribute to the project. Malpractice? Raise your hand. Yes, Pam. Okay. Okay. I don't think you, as long as there's no, it's good practice to disclose it, but I don't know that it would be a per se violation not to, if you didn't think in your judgment that it would affect your judgment, if that makes sense. Say that again. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Yes,
Yeah,
I.
it's sort of implicit in this, in the way we frame the question, is that this is kind of a routine, maybe not very interesting kind of issue of legal advice. How do you contribute? I mean, you have to sign a contributor agreement or something. Nothing really in depth like that.
Right, but yeah, like I mean, well, it's still legal advice, but it's legal advice that there's unlikely to be like a complicated strategy behind on behalf of the project. So
where your advice would draw upon your prior experience and knowledge of clients, of past clients' strategy.
So I mean, for example, I mean if you represent a particular, if you've represented somebody in 500 real estate transactions, right? I mean, just to kind of take this to kind of a more general, lawyer land. You've represented the same client. They've bought land 500 times, and they have a playbook that they use in their negotiation. And all of a sudden, you have a falling out with that lawyer, and all of a sudden you represent someone on the other side of that transaction. If you have like a detailed knowledge of the playbook that corporation or that person uses in when they're trying to purchase property, and you're using it, to your new client's advantage, and that playbook is confidential or privileged or strategy, that you can run into some real issues, as noted in the comments of the rule. Okay. Who has the board? Team 3. Okay. That was 400. Team 3 has the board. Back 2 rows. Anyone jump in. Okay. Slowing it down. You were admitted in State A and provide pro bono services to an open source project whose developers live across the world. No developer is based in State A. Malpractice? Anybody? Well, I mean, you can raise your hand and answer with caveats and assumptions. It's really hard to write a question that all lawyers will accept and say yes, this set of facts is right on, and I have no other caveats. So. you're saying because there's nothing specific to the state itself. So I agree with everything that everybody said. There is, it's probably not permitted under the rules as they stand right now. There's, it's an antiquated system that we have where these state bars, and this really is a federal question. But the rule is very clear. Like you can't practice in like other states if there's no nexus to your state.
There's something in the comment I think about fact patterns where the lawyers actually being consulted because they have this reputation and expertise in an area of law that is like a sort of transpoint, federal area of law. It transcends any particular kind of state law. I don't know how realistic it's going to be for a project to consult on an open source license issue that is going to be purely federal, like copyright, and sort of not draw upon state law issues. I mean, I think that the conservative answer is definitely probably.
Conservative answer is it depends. But yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
I think that if the answer is no, it's going to be because of the point that Pam made that let's say this is a kind of a trademark registration issue like that other hypothetical. I mean that's basically purely federal issue. Suppose you're a lawyer who has expertise in that particular area of law.
Okay, so just I mean, I think this is something that in our world seems kind of strange, but it's just maybe it's something that should be reformed for questions of federal law generally. But there is nothing in the comments about saying, well, if you're advising about patent law or advising about copyright law, like matters of pure patent or pure copyright law, that there's an exception for you. It's not there in the comments. It's not there in the rules. This is the model rules. Might vary by state. But
it's an area where the ethics rules sort of reflect protectionism.
So I think no points, and we're going to go to back to team 3, who had the board previously. Your client is the target of GPL informant brought by Mrs. Softy. You email Softy asking her about an issue of GPL interpretation. Malpractice. Let's assume yes. Okay, if she's represented, then yes. Let's see where we. Yes. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I should have. That was a egg on my face situation where I should have said in the question that Softy was represented. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Team 3 wins again. All right, you have the board. All right. Linux Kernel Enforcement, a nonprofit that handles GPL enforcement for Linux kernel developers pro bono, invites you to join its board. You accept even though you have a client who ships proprietary kernel modules. Let's assume that Linux Kernel Enforcement views proprietary kernel modules as infringing the GPL, and your client doesn't provide complete and corresponding source code for those kernel modules. That's worthy of a bar answer to this question. Very concise, that's correct. Rule 6.3 actually explicitly Well, maybe I would have deducted 1 point for not citing the rule specifically. But serving on the board of a nonprofit pro bono organization does not make it your client, but you can't participate in a decision that would create a concurrent conflict of interest with your client. Oh, yeah. Okay. So team 3, you have the board. Yeah. Let's go, Karen. Client comes to you with a free and open source software legal issue. You have no experience, but take the case. That's correct. Correct. Textbook answer. It probably would be unless you do exactly what everybody said, which was you need the skill and there's an exception, which is you can then associate or study or gain knowledge in other ways to become competent even if you have no idea what the heck your client's talking about when they walk in the door.
Still a terrible idea.
Is that the right link? Okay. What's going on here? Is that the same question? No? That was the same question. Okay. It might have been a link issue. I'm sorry if it was. Our newfangled technology. How are we doing on time? Let's do. It wasn't privilege for 300. Privilege for 300, but it was not. So I'll get us there. Hold on. There we go. Client retains you to audit their code base to ensure there are no license violations. You hire a software developer to help you understand how the client's code base works. You later turn over the developer's notes in response to a subpoena of practice. No, those notes need to be turned over, is what you're. Okay. Right. So you're saying work product doesn't apply. Anyone else? Okay, so we all agree? All right. So it's actually, I think that the documents are actually likely attorney-client privilege because if you're an attorney, you don't understand the technical details of what your client is doing, and you hire somebody to help you gain that understanding. There is precedent, admittedly, in the Second Circuit. There's precedent in the Second Circuit that says, look, if that's just to advise the lawyers, they understand what the facts are in the case, so that they can then provide their advice. That is attorney-client privilege. It's information given for the purpose of providing legal advice. So, right, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it. No one would claim that a translator, if your client doesn't speak English, that they could then subpoena the translator for everything that went on when you were advising your client. It's a similar concept applying in technology. If you're ever presented with that in court, I would use that analogy. That's very good. Okay. 5 minutes. Should we move on to final malpractice? Okay, so let's get a tally of the scores. So we know.
Team 1 has 1,100. Team 2, I'm afraid, has 350. And Team 3 has a lot.
Okay.
2950 if I calculated that correctly.
All right. So write down what you're wagering, and you can wager up to triple or. Okay. Write down what you're wagering, everybody. Imagine the Jeopardy music playing. gonna say you can triple or you can quadruple your bids. Just to keep it interesting. I'm changing the rules midstream here. Okay, does everybody have it written down? Okay, team 2 has not even been talking to one another. So there's no way there's a consensus on what. They're all in. So they're 4 times.
4 times. Give me 5. I'll take 5.
Okay. You have done some work for a seller on license compliance in the past. When seller is getting purchased by acquisition retains you to do a code audit on seller. You agree and fire off an email to seller that acquisition asks you to look into the code and provide an opinion. You tell seller that's a good idea because you're familiar with seller's code. Seller tells you about a compliance issue that you put in your report to acquisition. Malpractice. You can talk about it amongst yourselves. We have take a minute, think about it. There's a lot of parties here, lots going on. I love how the fact that we throw people fixate on them. All right. In the interest of finishing on time. So in the interest of finishing on, you've had your discussion. Let's should we move on to the answer and then we can discuss, or do you guys want to go around in a circle? It's up to.
Is the correct answer the number of different ways?
This is an issue spotter. I mean, there's a variety of different problems here that you might want to that you could fixate on or talk about. So why don't we just, because we're kind of up against it, we'll see what Richard and I say, which is maybe really heavy hitters up here. So you're permitted under Rule 2.2 to provide a legal evaluation for use by third parties. So seller, retained you to provide an evaluation. You're permitted to do that and disclose that opinion for third parties. But it's essential during this whole process that you're very clear who the client is. So the best way to handle this, or my advice on handling this, would be to say to the seller, you're retaining me to provide an opinion for acquisitions use. So anything that I find out during my investigation, I can tell to acquisition. Yeah, sure, yep. But the issue here is that, in fact, well, that would have been bad. The fact that acquisition retained you causes a lot of issues, right? Because all of a sudden you've been unclear about who the client is. It was seller, so you have duties to not disclose, things that seller has told you. But acquisition wants to hire you and they want to pay for you. I mean, maybe the best way to handle this would be to say something like, seller's the client, acquisition's paying seller's bills, but it's not going to interfere with your judgment. Maybe. There are a lot of kind of issues to unpack here. So we ended with a maybe. So should we just award everybody points? And was everybody all in? Okay, so there we go. There you have it. No prizes this year, unfortunately. So.
Can I add just one quick?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah.
So when I was a solo practice, my malpractice insurer said actually one of the top ways in which people screw up
Yeah.
is not terminating
Yeah.
debt representation.
Excellent. Yeah.
They had like a template termination letter that they like you to use, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is like one of the ways this could go badly wrong is if you never actually terminated your representation of seller.
Yeah. That's an important point, I think. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of people use engagement letters, and then a lot of even very sophisticated firms never terminate because it just falls off the radar. Okay. That's it. Thanks everyone for being a great contestant.
We're going to take a small break and we'll be back at the same stage for Fontana. I'll be right back. I want to get started real quick.
computer up because I needed to look at the other questions, the non-public stuff. I don't know, but I think we can just give out the URL, and maybe that will. Well, so because the thing is that people need to type in their own questions anyway, so they need a device.
We have an extra mic, so worst case scenario.
Huh?
We have an extra mic, so worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be fine. I just was,
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking there would be a blackboard, but there's no place to. I was thinking that there would be a blackboard, but there's no place to just write down what the URL is for the. So I'll just have to dictate it because I don't want to use my computer for the.
Yeah.
Or actually, I can't. Maybe I will just for the time being, so they can get the URL. Oh, that's okay. I just need it for a minute. I'm just going to give them the. Oh wait, why don't we get it? Would you mind grabbing a fourth chair so that I don't have to stand? Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. I don't have a. Oh, it's not. Wait a minute. I was assuming that there was. I don't have a connector myself. That's okay. No. We'll just because all I need it for is a URL, so I can just tell them what the URL is. Yeah, so you can turn that off. Is this mic working? Can you hear me? You can probably hear me without it. So the way that what we're going to do is this is going to be a panel discussion, and we have this mic is not cooperating. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's totally fine because I don't plan to talk. So, but one of the things that there is an Etherpad set up for audience members to add questions that they want to pose to the panel. So we have some prepared questions that we're going to start with, but we also, rather than sort of, like come to the mic, step forward to the mic kind of question solicitation, what I prefer to do instead is there's an Etherpad set up so that you can just add any questions you might have as we go along to the Etherpad, and then we'll sort of field those. I'll moderate, and we'll field some of those questions too. So the Etherpad address, which I can't project because I'm technologically challenged without an adapter, is so it's HTTPS. It's etherpad.wikimedia.org. And then when you get that far, it's going to be /p/ and then scale 16xtm. And if that's case sensitive, let me know because I can tell you what the casing is.
It almost certainly is.
So it's sure. So it's etherpad.wikimedia.org /p.
Oh, great.
And it worked. Oh, is there text on it already? No. Yeah. So it's going to be So /P / after that, it's all capitals except for the letter A. So scale 16XTM. Every letter is capitalized except for the A. 16X.
I have written it down, and it's going to be passed around.
Oh, yay.
If you can read my handwriting.
So when you get there, you'll see, you should see, it will say, welcome to WMF Etherpad, but you got it? All right. All right, super. Okay, so that's where, if you have audience questions as we go along, then type those in, and we'll take a look at those, and we'll keep an eye on those as we go along. So with that introduction, what I'd like to do is start out with everybody giving a brief introduction. Why don't I do last, because then I'll ask the first question. So why don't we have Jennifer? Why don't you introduce yourself? Oh, Stephen, they're on my, they're.
I'm Jen Dumas. I'm Chef Software. I've been there for almost 7 years, which in the start of years is kind of like dog years. Was the first lawyer there. Been there since it started small, and we were previously called Opscode. Now we're called Chef. So we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit in the panel. And it's both a proprietary and an open source company, which is a little bit interesting, and so might have some things to talk about with that as well. And we're based in Seattle, so I flew down from Seattle last night, and I'm excited to get some vitamins.
And Louis?
So hi, I'm Louis Villa. I am the general counsel and co-founder of Tidelip, which is a small but growing startup, VC-backed startup that is working on enterprise open source support that also supports the maintainers who actually do the creation and innovation around open source. Previously, I have been a coworker of Stephen's at the Wikimedia Foundation. I've been an attorney at Mozilla, at Greenberg Traurig, where I represented, among others, Google in the Google Oracle litigation. Very, very long time ago, I got a CS degree and wrote some very ugly Perl.
All right, Stephen?
I'm Stephen Laporte. I'm legal director at the Wikimedia Foundation. We are the nonprofit that hosts and runs Wikipedia and maintains a few other open source projects like Wiktionary or Wikidata. We also maintain MediaWiki, which is the wiki software that powers Wikipedia and a few other websites. So I'm in-house there. We have a somewhat small legal team that supports the foundation and does some public policy work advocating for free software, open source, closed domain, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the conversation.
He's also incredibly awesome, but humble.
And I'm Pam Chesnick, and I have been a trademark lawyer for my entire legal career. Moved into software and then free software. Software about 10 years ago, and free software about, well, more than that actually. Free software maybe for even close to 10 years. I'm in private practice now. I have a solo practice. Before that, I was Red Hat, and I was a trademark counsel for Red Hat, which is where I got my feet wet with trademarks and free and open source software. So with that, we're going to. So the title of this talk is Trademarks: Explaining Its Importance to Engineering and Executives. So which is I'm very thrilled about the topic. I think it's, I'm kind of tired of doing trademarks 101. So I had to do something a little different. So I have some questions, and I'm just going to start with the first question that I kind of prepared for the panel is, do you believe that trademarks that are used for free and open source software or open culture are qualitatively different from those used in proprietary fields, and if so, in what way? And we have a volunteer. Do we have a volunteer on that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, a couple of us. Actually, before I go, can those of you in the back hear me okay? It's not a huge room, so okay. Yeah, fundamentally, trademark law is about protecting people's understanding of the source of a product and implicitly tied to the source, the quality of the product, right? And collaborative, what Yochai Benkler at Harvard Law called peer production, inherently involves a muddling of the concept of source, right? There's a spectrum of that. Like some places, the source is better defined than others. Some anarchically.
Right.
executives who come from outside of open source, you really have to help them understand that some of the questions that they have been told by their old lawyers are really cut and dried, are no longer quite so cut and dried, right? And so you really have to think about it, I think, in a little bit different way.
And I think going to the quality though, are they qualitatively different? I think what's both good and bad about trademarks in the open source space is you have the benefit of the community, both, supporting you and building you up, and then also you have the benefit of the community using your mark. And so, it goes both ways. It's both, you have perhaps a greater requirement to go control that mark where you might have some cultural issues with the community saying, hey, what are you doing? But at the same time, in some ways, it might actually benefit and make your mark that much stronger because you have all these people who are passionate about it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. A community can be, as I'm sure Stephen has some stories, a community can be your greatest asset in promoting it, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think proportionally your trademark is maybe one of the most valuable things that an open source project has. Like, the code is being given away, a lot of the stuff is about freedom and sharing, and the project itself sort of has to maintain that trademark in order to have a central place for people to give you more code or to know what that software does. So you're almost hanging more of your project on trademark than other forms of intellectual property, so you have to sort of think about it a bit deeper.
Right. It also serves as, tying together what both of you were saying, I think, it can, at every company there are people who are really passionate about the brand and it becomes part of their identity. Like, I don't know how many Microsoft employees have Microsoft tattoos, but I suspect it's more than zero. But we know that there are people with, there was a guy at Wikimedia who had the Creative Commons logos tattooed on his knuckles. Red Hat announced that they're rebranding, and in their FAQ about the rebranding, there was something like, we asked all 12 people who we know have logo tattoos, and they all said they were okay with this, right? Like, so it really becomes a central, I don't want to say an organizing principle, that's not quite right, but it becomes a center of gravity, that's what I'm trying to say, for your community.
Yeah, and in the Wikimedia trademark policy, we have a provision on baking a cake with our logo on it.
But do you have a provision for tattoos? Because now I'm fascinated, I want to read my trademark policy.
We don't get that many questions about tattoos. We get a lot of questions about cakes. Like, people want to use the logo, and that's a good thing. It's creating more value for the project. So you want to encourage it, but it's the sort of thing you probably don't encounter with a more traditional perspective on trademark.
Yeah, I think I like Jen's point that it's a plus and a minus to have this community involvement. I think I hear a lot of one of the transitions I think in traditional trademark law now is this concept of social media and having constituencies, and they're all on Twitter and people want to use their icons, which is all well and good. One thing I think, we've been doing this for years, so it's not new to us, this concept of community involvement, but it's also a little different because if you're a traditional, say you're a luxury brand and you're trying to broadcast your message and you want to have people express affiliation with you, it's still sort of a one-directional broadcast. It's still the company that's trying to direct the messaging, direct the branding, and instead here in this situation, it's a much more collaborative effort that directs the branding and the goodwill in that trademark. So it's definitely an interesting world to live in. Moving on to the next question. It says, I have in my experience, executives in technology companies have a hard time in general understanding the value of trademarks. In what way is it better or worse for trademarks for open source and free software projects or products?
And in answering that in a prep call we had, I spit out a theory that I'm still not sure if it's true, but I'd love to hear more feedback or even from the audience. I think a lot of the most successful executives in open source companies are the ones who are really comfortable with a lack of control, right? They're okay with, you know what, this stuff is out there and it's not going to be perfectly under my control, and I'm okay with that, right? Those are executives who are going to be well prepared to deal with some of the challenges of open source. Those same people who are inclined to be okay with giving it away, it's going to be hard to explain to them why your trademark you maybe need to do less
brothers, um, you know, probably would like to ratchet that down a little bit more, but if you have a strong technical leader on the exec team who can really, you know, kind of take the lead with that, I think that's really helpful. Although I will say, you know, cutting on the other side of that, sometimes as the lawyer there, I feel like, guys, you know, let's bring it back, let's slow down a little bit, and, you know, let's try to rein it in. And so again, you know, there's good and bad skills of that, but having a compelling technical leader on the exec team with a lot of influence is really helpful.
Yeah, the two ways that I've sort of had these sort of conversations, I think that there's a lot of different ways you can approach explaining the value of a trademark to someone, either someone who wants to rely on trademark protection too much or too little. I think the first that matters a lot in open source is the concept of stewardship. I think people who have an open source project think about stewardship in a lot of different ways, like how do you keep the community healthy and running, and protecting the reputation of that project is another aspect of stewardship. So trademark goes hand in hand with that. And I think that helps you get that balance. You don't want to be too, you know, top down or controlling as a steward. You want to help it grow. The second aspect is security and maintaining some protection for your users, because trademarks can often be a vector for not just confusion, but, you know, false products or phishing attempts or typo squatting on your domain name. So there's a component of protecting your trademark that's also about keeping your users safe. But when you talk about security, open source projects really understand those issues and will respect the trademark concerns much higher. So I think those are really two good avenues into that conversation.
So, but let me just interrupt. Is there an Etherpad that has questions? Because the one I'm looking at that was for public, I haven't seen, so I may be on the wrong. Yeah, but there's nothing there. Has anybody posted a question on an Huh? Oh, go. Okay, I see test. All right, so you're just not. That's okay. Nobody's curious. That's totally fine. But let me just leverage off of some of these, particularly Jen, one comment that you made, which is what. Let me see where's my question. No, yeah, what was no? It was so. What is your experience with engineers and their approach to sharing a trademark? Because I think this is where people say, well, you know, why can't we write a copyleft? Why can't we write a trademark left license? That kind. So how do you kind of corral this sort of need for the trademark to do its job, but maybe people don't understand sort of how trademark actually works, particularly in comparison to copyright, which they're much more familiar with.
And I feel like a lot of times there's confusion between, you know, use of the code versus use of the trademark. So, you know, I think that's a big piece of it, and unbundling that. And then just culturally, I'll say, you know, I'm going to talk about the growth of Chef as a company. We started as an open source project, and then we decided to commercialize and build a proprietary project to ask people for money. And there was a lot of angst in the company about that. And, you know, what are you doing? And you're getting away from your roots. And so there's, you know, throughout the course of the company, there's been attention and a lot of attention paid to that to continue to honor the open source roots while at the same time go try to make money. And, you know, through that, I think just a lot of it was, you know, upfront communications with the development team. We're not going to restrain you. We have, you know, a lot of these open source projects where you can continue to contribute. You just have to respect and understand that we have some proprietary fork, if you will, you know, and sort of working through that. So a lot of it is just culture and perception.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Do you get pushback from people on sort of thinking that they should be allowed to use more community members? I'm thinking that they should get to use the trademark when you have to pull the reins in on that, or maybe Wikimedia and Wikipedia would have sort of experience with that.
Yeah, I think the main way we resolve that tension is through our trademark policy. So we have a document that we wrote and we collaborated on. We sort of posted it for comments and received an epic amount of feedback on it, incorporated some of it, and sort of pushed back on other provisions we couldn't accommodate, and then made that sort of freely available for people to use. And that document, I think, resolves a lot of that confusion, and you can sort of point people back to it, and helps you sort of strike a balance that's written down. And I think people like the balance we have reached in copyright because they have like a good understanding of the principles that drive it, and they have a document they can turn to, and the fact that trademark is like sort of like a discipline for lawyers that doesn't quite have a piece of paper you can point to in the open source community, that makes it difficult. So sort of giving them something to look at, I think resolves a lot of
to elaborate a little bit on that, to give you some sense, when Steven says epic, we usually measured our comments at Wikimedia in units of Moby Dick. So, the trademark policy was 1 Moby Dick's worth of comments. The privacy policy was 2 Moby Dick's worth of comments. That kind of thing, right? I don't remember exactly how much the trademark policy was, but it was large. And the other thing that I think that Wikimedia did really well, and that folks should take a look at if they're curious, was actually engaged with some user experience designers to make it not just a traditional, Times New Roman on a white background document, but something that could be much more interactive. You can click through to FAQs and things like that. That's not going to be appropriate for all organizations, but I do think Wikimedia, Mozilla has some similar. I think Mozilla may have been the first open source brand to do a trademark FAQ. The price of having a really successful open source brand is getting a lot more questions about how you use the thing, right? The bigger your community is, the more your community wants to identify with it, which also means they're going to ask your lawyers how to deal with it, right? And so that's a trade-off that, as we say a lot at Tidelift, that will be a good problem to have. So hopefully we can all be so successful as Wikimedia.
Right. And just to follow up, particularly with Jen and Stephen, can you give us examples when you mentioned that you had to push back on some people when they asked for things and you pushed back? Same thing with you. Are there any examples that you could share with us on where you thought that there might be what developers or what community members wanted to do maybe was a little beyond what you were comfortable doing with respect to protecting the trademark?
I think ours was more an issue of, again, internally there was kind of the intangible feeling of betrayal because we started as an open source project and then we moved into this commercial. So there wasn't any specific misuse, but it was, we have some developers who are just, they live, eat, and breathe. Maybe they do have the tattoo across their mouth. I don't know. I've never looked. But we do have the ability as a company to direct them to our open source projects and to keep them from being, infected by the proprietary projects. So just sort of working with that mindset, but also, at some point saying we're a company and you work for the company, you got to grow up a little bit, and and this is part of it. So kind of balancing the, and validating the feelings, but at the same time, doing what we need to do as a company to move forward. So for us, it was more kind of intangible feelings versus any specific, usage that was making us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. In our case, we had to think a lot about what our brands actually represent, right? Wikipedia is a website you go to. You type in wikipedia.org and you read some stuff about the television show you're watching. But it's also something that's freely licensed, which means people take it and put it inside of apps or use it in the background to run their software, their machine learning algorithms, or things that people wanted to make clients for to actually access on your phone. And these different things, people often want to use the Wikipedia name in order to promote this other usage of the same content. So we had to think about what sort of usage did we want to promote, and what sort of usage did we want people to get permission on, and then what sort of usage was completely forbidden and out of the picture, right? And if you're familiar with trademark law, you'll understand the basic things you want to not allow, like generic usages of your brand or using it to represent something that is directly competing or confusing with the product that you have. I think the no category is pretty clear, but it's sort of that maybe category of things that you see value in, but you also want to discourage. And that sort of work was something that we had to come up with a few different strategies on. So one strategy that Wikimedia used was coming up with separate brands that we use for different forms of activities. So we actually have one brand that we CC license and we don't protect with a trademark, this sort of Wikimedia community logo that's usable by people who want to have meetups and edit us on. It's sort of like the free to use icon. And that's different and very distinct from the Wikipedia logo. And giving that sort of separate logo for a community usage that kind of allows more free reign for people who want to do things has been, I think, a pretty successful practical strategy for not just Wikimedia, but other open source projects as well. And it's sort of different depending on what your community wants to do.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious about this now. When we were putting together our trademark policy, we went back and forth about this, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't read your trademark policy at the start. Do you distinguish between commercial use of your mark versus like if somebody wants to sell a T-shirt versus make a T-shirt? Is that a difference for you?
Yeah, we do actually distinguish commercial usage, which is which required quite a bit of discussion because we are a free project, so people can commercially use Wikipedia. But if you want to sell T-shirts, there are different trademark considerations that are invoked than if you're putting a poster up in your university to host an event about Wikipedia. So you have to sort of think about what the trademark implications are of what you allow and not.
Yeah, and that's going to be very different from project to project, right? So I helped open a street map, which is like, if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially like Wikipedia but for maps. But even in that, in some ways, very similar context, when we were adapting the Wikimedia policy to use for OpenStreetMap, there was still a lot of tweaks around how the OpenStreetMap commercial community has a different relationship to OpenStreetMap than like commercial users do for Wikipedia. So we did have to adjust that quite a bit. So that's going to be one of those things where one size definitely does not fit all, right? Which is another difference between copyright in open source, where we've really coalesced around a handful of licenses, and trademark, where I think for good reasons there's not coalescing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say in my experience, there I finally heard the mic. In my experience, this is the most changeable. The most changeable areas are sort of what about merchandise, whether or not people are allowed to make merchandise on their own, and the meetups and the conferences and all of that, and whether or not people can use the trademark. And from my perspective, it's all okay. We just have to paper it up the right way to make sure that you're protecting the validity of the trademark. But it's doable. It's doable. But to me, it is a very sensitive issue. In each community will be very different on what. And some will say, oh, it's terrific. We're happy. We don't care if people make T-shirts and sell them. That's totally fine. And other people say, well, no, you can make a T-shirt and give it out to your meetup group, but you can't sell them. Or I've seen if you sell them, you have to give us some of the proceeds. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but it changes a lot. It does change a lot. But let's use this as an opportunity to kind of jump to the question one of the questions I have, which was how does having, and I think you've alluded to it a lot, but maybe we can just sort of see if there's any more. How does having a proprietary product affect the name of the open source project? Like, that you're kind of trying to use the same name for two different things, and how are you trying to balance that?
Yeah, a good question. So my company is Chef, and our main product is also Chef. But a little story there, we actually started out as Opticode, and so that was our name, and our product was Chef at the time. And Chef was a proprietary superset of Chef Client, Chef Server. And I've got Nathan back there at TV. Honestly. I always forget which was my client. I forget. But we actually had a challenge with that. We would go to trade shows, and we'd have our Chef booth, and or we have our Opticode booth, excuse me, and people would be like, who's Opticode? And we'd say, we have Chef. Oh, Chef, wait, but doesn't so-and-so own that? Or, so you guys work with Chef? Or like, no, we are Chef. And so we actually had a significant branding issue at the beginning, and so we decided, well, screw it, we're going to name our company after our product. Which at the time I think was probably a good idea, but now we have a couple different open source projects. We've got different, so our proprietary product is still Chef Automate. However, we have Inspect, we have Habitat. So now we have a bunch of different open source projects underneath Chef. So I hope I'm answering the question. I'm just going through the history. We definitely, I think, have a bit of a branding issue now, overall company branding issue, because we have these different open source projects that don't directly tie to the brand to our company anymore. So hindsight being 2020, maybe we overcorrected 5 years ago, but we were solving a branding problem at that time that was significant. Now we have a new and exciting branding problem to deal with going forward.
Do you find that how does the use of the name for the open source project have a positive or negative impact on the proprietary product?
There's a lot of confusion, for sure. And I'll say, in sales of our commercial product, oftentimes our sales team has to, but wait, but Chef, isn't that open source? And can I get it here? And but there's Chef over here. And, and so I think it sort of adds some complexity, for sure, to the sales cycle. A little bit of complexity to the licensing and how I'm going to write an order form to sell the proprietary product. And and so there's a lot of pressures on just pricing and sales cycle, um, because of the naming that, perhaps aren't ideal, but again, that's kind of the path we've chosen, so here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's all really interesting stuff where, and I think this goes to a couple of the other questions in here, at what point do you engage, do the execs, do we have a holistic talk about trademark and branding versus just, we need it for this reason, think about the bigger picture.
Yeah, my experience is it's hard. That's exactly right. It's very hard to get people to listen to this when it's actually, as we've said, the trademark actually turns out to be probably the most important facet, and it's really hard to get people to understand that and to pay attention to it and to critically understand how it affects everything going forward.
And
so.
To pay money for it.
Yeah. Yes, right. Yeah.
Sales can be your ally.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those things, like, engineering gets very sensitive and prickly about this, and it's sometimes hard to, I say that with love, and it can be hard sometimes to explain. And sales, telling some of those stories, in my experience, telling some of those stories about, like, hey, we sat down at the table and we tried to sell the thing, and everyone at the table was confused. Like, when you can tell those stories effectively, a lot of people who had previously been sort of rigid in their thinking can be like, I understand why this concerns me. It can help unlock conversations.
Yeah. There's a question coming in. I was just going to follow. Well, it's a follow-up. It's a follow-up, so I was kind of waiting for whoever's typing it to finish typing. Let's see. It says, following up on Jennifer's comments about product naming and branding, choosing to trademark your open source project and use the same name for the company can end up requiring you to use that name for every project the company creates in order to maintain the brand association. I think if I'm exactly. And one of the things, if I'm understanding it correctly, for example, Apache, Apache tries to enforce the use of Apache as the umbrella for all. So Apache was just originally the web server, but now it's Foundation. It's a home of many projects, and they try to get everyone to say it's Apache Kafka, it's Apache Cassandra, it's Apache Hadoop. So that's maybe one example where there's sort of the naming strategy. There's sort of a naming strategy, but I don't know if that's one example. And
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Actually, so and this is, I think, really for both of you, because you're that problem of umbrella and product is not something that's unique to open source, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Microsoft Office, Microsoft Windows, like, these things happen across the technology space all over this. Do you think that open source creates an additional complication for companies facing that question of using an umbrella brand? Do you think it makes it trickier or harder in any way?
That's really interesting. Let's just use Microsoft for example. Let's say they have an open source project,
which they do.
Many these days, right? And they've got such a history with open source, and in the past, and yes, of course, they're seeing the light and moving forward in a good direction. But just thinking about that, somebody might have more skepticism for a Microsoft open source project based on branding. Sorry, and I hope that's okay. I'm fair to say. Okay.
Well, but I was actually thinking.
I don't think anything is too controversial what I said there.
Well, I was actually thinking of the question in a slightly different way, right? Like, if assuming that Microsoft has fewer tattoos per unit of customers, and Satya, the CEO, says, hey, you know what? We're going to move to an umbrella brand, or we're going to move away from an umbrella brand. That's complex in any company. Whereas if your CEO says, or if Wikimedia's CEO says, hey, we're going to rebrand everything as. So Wikipedia, for example, has a Wiktionary, which is like a dictionary, but for Wikipedia, right? You could imagine a situation where the CEO says, we're going to rename that to the Wikipedia Dictionary, right? Like, do you think that would that open source aspect make it more complex for that CEO? Make it, maybe that's just too idiosyncratic a question, but.
Well, I think the complexity of the open source project is you have the community involved, and so what you have to consider there. And this was when I worked with John Adams at Red Hat, who is the brand manager there. He always thought about it as being an open source. He thought about traditional marketing as having two constituencies, which is the seller and the buyer. But open source, you have this third leg, which was the community, and we thought about it as adding a third leg, which actually adds stability to it. But for every decision, it's not. I don't think it's for every decision that is made about the community name, you have to take that constituency into account also. You're not just worried. You're not just bringing in the branding company that says, well, if the name can't be too long or it won't get resonance, you have to really invest the community in what's going on too. So that kind of affects how it's going to, what's going to happen. And the chef, not the problem that Apache has, I wouldn't characterize it as a problem, but the situation that Apache is in is they became known for their flagship products, the Apache web server, and people still think, I refer to Apache. I don't refer to it as the Apache web server. I refer to it as Apache. So and I think that's the problem when you start to gather those other products and try to when you start with a name that's already very strongly associated with one project or one product, to then try to, build that out and say, oh, but now there's also chef, whatever. I think it takes years, if not decades, to get people to appreciate that you've transmorgified this product's name into a house brand. So, anyway, let's see.
While you're looking at the next question, Pam, I just
Yeah.
wanted to tack on to that last. There's a sense of momentum. I mean, every successful brand has momentum, right? Where changing it is hard. It's definitely think the community makes steering that brand ship even harder, right? Certainly the Apache one. I mean, Apache hasn't the Apache web server project has not been Apache for a decade, 15 years. I don't even know. I still.
So what should a new project consider when thinking about naming a new project? What should they think about? Whether it's from a corporate perspective, who's getting one, or what?
Never name anything. It's too much work.
Yes, no.
Is that malpractice, Justin?
You talk with your outside counsel about these things, right? I think in open source projects, there's a lot of people getting a lot of stuff done just by pure force of will. And sometimes they will go out there with a name they have decided, they've already drawn their own logo, and they will start going. And as an attorney involved, you need to sort of be a check in the process, something that should be as high a priority as security and other considerations that are already being considered. And one step, depending on how prominent this is going to be, is going to be to hire outside counsel and have them make sure it's not being used in another country, that it's not being it's not going to cause you other problems down the road, because there's nothing. There's the only thing worse than telling someone they have to talk to a lawyer in the process is telling them after they've started publicizing it, is now that they have to change their logo because someone else has sent you a nasty letter, or because you are infringing on someone else's rights. And at that point, you actually have to take action. So you can sort of save some headaches by talking to outside counsel.
And I think where you are in the process is important. We actually, with one of our open source projects, we had a name that people internally loved, and we were ready to go, and then it was like, oh, we should check with Jen and make sure that's okay, and we did a search, and it wasn't going to be clear, and this was 2 weeks before it was bad. It was about 2 weeks before we were ready to launch, and we had to do a big scramble and come up with an alternative name, and thankfully it wasn't to the point where it was already live and we were take my pain to hopefully ease your
Yeah.
pain going forward.
If I could just take a poll in the room, how many of you are aware of or have assisted with any company, open source, not open source, any company who got that letter and had to change their name? Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. But it's not just limited to open source. It happens all the time. I consider it my employment, but.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough for those of you who are in house that like earlier you can get in the loop on those kinds of decisions with marketing and with your community, right? I mean, somewhat famously, Red Hat had a problem with code names about literally they tended to be chosen the night before, and they were Red Hat finally got itself inserted a little earlier in the
Is that
process.
the Fedora names or the?
Yeah, the Fedora
Yeah.
names. Yeah. I wasn't there, so it's all secondhand for me. If anybody wants to clarify later, but yeah, I just had that talk. So the startup I'm at, we're less than a year old. We're 13 employees, and that was the subject that came up in our in the all hands I was at this week. Right, was the how do we get legal in earlier, so that when they can be in the loop, right? That's important regardless.
So I'm gonna I have a prepared question. I'm gonna combine with one of the public questions. So the sort of question, the next topic of discussion for the panel was the very tricky area of enforcement, of how to enforce the trademark in this communal environment. And then one of the questions was, I think this folds into it, is thoughts on using trademark in a username or a handle like Twitter. For example, Linux Girl, what if they had a patron and were getting money using this ID? So it's enforcement, not just sort of traditional enforcement, but let's also expand a little bit sort of into social media, which I know is just like, when I was at Red Hat, like the number of what do you call those little icons? Not the favicon, but in Twitter when you have your picture.
Oh, your avatar.
Avatar, thank you. The avatar, like the number of shadow men I saw in avatars. So what exactly? How do you go about this delicate task? And where are your lines the same or maybe different because of the communal nature of the trademark? You don't have to tell true stories here. We can. We realize there's privilege here too.
So I think it's really important in a lot of these areas. It's important to have a philosophy, but I think in enforcement it's particularly important to have a rubric that you're using internally around enforcement that is more than just is this infringing or not, because you need to understand like where your organization wants to go with their trademarks. Like why do they want to protect it in order to understand how to enforce it properly? Because no one wants there to be infringement out there, but there's some infringement that is actively harming you, and there's other infringement out there that is something you could write a letter on if you wanted to, but do you really need to? And understanding how you have that conversation is better when you have principles and you have a strong philosophy that guides it. And I would say when you get that balance right, you can actually use your community as sort of a superpower too, because your community are people who love your brand because they love your project. They're going to donate their time to write code. They're also going to tell you about people misusing your mark. They're going to potentially contact them for you and sort of resolve disputes that don't even require a lawyer to get involved. So thinking about ways to communicate back with the community what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then doing it in a really friendly manner, right? I think in open source projects in particular, you should see like a cease and desist letter as a way to potentially recruit a new volunteer or donor or something else. And if you're really good at crafting those letters, you can do it. You can sort of swing people over to your side. There's going to be obviously bad actors that you should approach appropriately, but having a good philosophy and then sort of turning your community into like a front line for these questions can save you a lot of time and energy that just requires monotony.
And I think something you said earlier was really a good point to emphasize, which is enforcement is about protecting it for everybody and and keeping it good and keeping it pure, clean. It's not don't ever use my name because it's more like protecting the I don't know, the
talk a lot about nominative fair use, right? This notion that if you're using the brand to refer in a factual manner to the thing, at least in the U.S., you're typically protected. Some of the developers who know about this sort of tend to wave that around as a shield that excuses just bad things.
I'm nominatively calling this same software by the same name.
Right, yeah. And I think that's one of those signs of, I think it is a healthy thing for an open source project to, accept and acknowledge, and for not just accept internally, but to affirmatively say, hey, we think nominative fair use is a thing. We're not going to go after it. A really mature one starts talking about examples of what's nominative fair use, what are things, again, on a case-by-case basis, something that's really targeted at particular niches might have a different approach than a project that's really global in scope like Wikipedia. But it's a hard one, right? I mean, I have a former client of mine who I won't name, and I wasn't there when they were no longer my clients when I noticed this, but there was an interesting Twitter bot that tweeted automatically certain facts and statistics about what was going on in the project, and at some point I stopped getting updates from that bot, and I was like, oh, I wonder what happened there, and I went and dug into it, and the author of the bot had the owner of the mark contacted me and started nastygram to me, and so now I don't do the bot anymore. And I don't know, I've never gone back to the client, didn't seem appropriate, so I don't know what their thinking was, but it seems to me, as now an outsider, that was a loss for that community, right? And I'm sure they did it, this is a smart, tactful, thoughtful client, so I'm sure they handled it with what they thought was good grace, but it just wasn't received that way by the author of the bot, and that was, several hundred people who followed that bot no longer got to have that touch point with that community, which was, maybe a loss. But maybe not. I don't know the details, right?
So, and one thing I wanted to kind of tie together was this concept of enforcement and how it ties into the trademark policy, which is it's very easy when you have a good, thorough trademark policy. It's very easy to point to it and say, and hopefully you keep it updated as new situations arise, as new use cases come up. You can keep updating your policy, and so it's very easy to say, I'm really sorry, but this is the policy, and we've said it. So it gives everybody. So it's much harder, I think, on the company to be that clear, because we like to sort of keep it close to the vest so that we have some ability to take into account different situations. It's very hard to sort of put down these bright lines on what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, but it is much to the benefit of the enforcement when you can point and say, well, no, we said you're not allowed to put the project name in the banner. It only has to be at the bottom or in a badge, or it has to hyperlink, or whatever ways that you allow people to express their affiliation and appreciation for a project that isn't going to. And it is, a lot of it is so much in the context. I know infringement when I see it. I know when it looks misleading. But to try to define that in sort of, in ways that you can give people some safe ground is difficult. But it's usually important. And then I think it's also important for the even though the project owner doesn't necessarily have to abide by those guidelines, that the project owner abide by those same standards. It's the same rules for everybody, and it's not the company who's doing something different because they're the owner, and so nobody's going to sue them for whatever they do. But that's that's just good branding, is to always have this very consistent branding message coming out. But that's why I think Mozilla had why the trademark guidelines are so much more important in open source projects than just regular commercial companies, because the commercial companies just say don't use our trademark, and they in a lot of words. That's what they say it in many different ways, a lot of words, but that's fundamentally what they're saying. So yeah.
Sort of go feedback on that too. I think having conversations with your trademark counsel on these issues, if you're using someone specializing in trademark, is really important. Like having a lot of conversations with your client if you are the trademark counsel, because you need to understand that philosophy. And having a trademark attorney who really gets this in open source is a really valuable thing. It's actually difficult to find, and if you find it, you need to make sure you're very much in sync, because
Yeah, and this is particularly, I think it's worth noting, like a lot of folks use various automated takedown tools these days, particularly bigger brands, and those are very much designed with the traditional big corporate, Disney, Coca-Cola, where the answer is no use ever, and so those takedown, those search and takedown notice tools are designed around that, right?
Yeah.
They tend not to work well for the Wikipedias and Red Hat.
Right. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those to begin with. I just think it's a little more nuance, requires a little more nuance than that. I like to think I as a human being, offer some value in the proposition.
Speaking as your client, this offers a lot of value.
No. Wow, 2 plugs, thanks. No. I have one question. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts. It says, interested in thoughts, comments on books written about trademark technologies. I'm not quite sure what that trademarked ED technologies. I'm not quite sure what the question is. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in and elaborate on what. Yeah.
That's interesting. That really ties into, kind of going back to our company, we really, balance acknowledgement and value of open source sensibilities with this proprietary thing. And so I'll just say, at Chef, we're actually supportive of that. And, we usually kind of treat it like, any other sort of moonlighting thing. I want to be an advisor for another company or be on a board, and I might owe some employees some homework on that. So I was just thinking, oh shit, there's something I need to do on that. But again, it's important as a company that we need to kind of walk the walk, which is to say we support open source and we support, being excited about it and free invention. So just as Chef, we do support that, and then we just try to tie in some parameters around that so everybody's clear about who owns what, who doesn't own what, because then it goes into you're the employee of the company, so who gets the royalties from the book, and you just kind of have to work through details like that. And I've said it 3 times, I'm sorry, but just perception is so important. It just goes back to making sure you're true to the spirit that you're conveying to your employees.
Yeah, and I would add to that it's also important to be transparent about all that, right? Like, because it's very easy to get some of this stuff muddled, especially in like situations where your founder is also the creator of the technology, or I've definitely seen, not specific to open source, but I've seen M&A deals fall apart because it turned out like, what was the exact? I think it was the ex-girlfriend of the founder actually was the owner of the company domain name, right?
Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And like emphasis on the X, so like there had to be a whole out of band settlement on that, and in a more concrete, specific to this group, there's a pretty hot new open source technology that I was looking at for something the other day, and the sole like lead developer registered for the trademark a couple months back, right? There's no company,
Right.
There's no entity. It's that sole developer, and there's a lot of ways in which that can be a strength if it's properly handled. But there's a lot of ways if it's not, if people aren't clear, if people aren't transparent about who owns what, why do they own it, that, like, I would say more than anything else in like the kind of situation with a book is like get clarity, right? Like the exact details in a lot of cases probably matter less than whether or not everybody's just on the same page.
Yeah, so in Wikimedia's case, we have a provision in our trademark policy around predominantly the fair use and site-sensitive mentions. So some uses in a book might be covered by that. It would be the sort of thing that just sort of happens without even talking to me. The vast majority of the cases, though, would not But I think, generally speaking, it's a good thing for open source to have more books because it enables more people to sort of use the technology. And that's ultimately what you want to do. Sort of boosts the goodwill and I think makes your brand even more valuable if done smartly. But it comes up a lot in Wikipedia's case, and there are some things that can sort of cause trouble for the foundation if it's not done properly. So we have guidelines around that.
So I have a general question here for all of you. So how has working in open source changed you as a lawyer? So let me just back up. So you had a CS background before becoming a lawyer.
I mean, I went to law school specifically to become an open source lawyer.
Okay. And what about?
I was a bankruptcy lawyer.
And
Yeah, I'm close to Lewis.
yeah, okay. So we kind of got people on both sides of the equation. I mean, either they've sort of stumbled into it. I was in the stumble into it camp.
I stumbled into it.
And then we have people who so question's still open.
Yeah, boy. I mean, for me.
Or maybe I should say how does being what did I say? How does working in open source change you as a lawyer? How does being a lawyer change your approach to open source? We could go both ways on that.
Yeah, sure.
5 minutes.
That way, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, look, the easy answer, how has open source changed my approach to be a lawyer? Like, I'm very pragmatic about my lawyering. I think in a way that not all of everybody at this table is very pragmatic, I'm sure, but like not, as we all know, some lawyers more sticklers for rules and details than actual outcomes. I have to think about that second part about lawyering affecting my open source.
Okay, I love it, and I think for me it's been liberating, and maybe this sounds silly, but it lets me be nice. Because a lot of times people value lawyers. Let's get a bulldog and let's get a and somebody tear them apart. And especially in open source, it lets me be nice, and that's so valuable to me, and I love it. I mean, I think you mentioned it. An enforcement action is, gosh, they're so excited about our product, they're using it inappropriately. What a great place to start. So yeah, I really love it.
Yeah, I love it too. I think that there's two very fascinating conversations I get to have over and over again. One of them is talking with lawyers and explaining sort of how open source philosophy works. And I think there's a lot that open source and sort of like trusting decentralized movements to get things right and sort of how these mechanisms have worked in practice. That's a really fascinating conversation to have with lawyers. And on the flip side, I know you're tired of Trademark 101, but Trademark 101 is a fun conversation to have. And open source engineers, I found, just among engineers, really care about the law. They care about getting things right, and they are often sort of like amateur armchair lawyers to begin with. So you can have some really fascinating conversations around the sort of principles that you discuss in law school and then think you're going to put on a shelf. Like you have to sort of re-crack the book every once in a while because open source engineers are super smart, and that means you sort of get these two fascinating sides. In trademarks in particular, I think this decentralization question keeps coming up because trademarks as a doctrine is about sort of centralizing control, and open source is about the exact opposite. So this conversation is often very difficult because there's sort of diametrically opposed trends in the technology and the law.
Right.
And I think that's just the most fascinating conversation to have. So.
I think I agree with the point that the developers and engineers you work with tend to be much more interested in legal aspects. So open source, those who work in open source are much more interested in legal aspects than in traditional companies.
They're systems thinkers, right? And this is a big.
Yeah,
we often
true.
don't think of the law as an engineered system, but there are definitely aspects of that is true, and they want to pick that apart, which can sometimes make you pull your hair out, but I think overall is often more fun, right?
Yeah. I'll just relate one story. I did a settlement with between an open source project and a proprietary company, and I kept telling the lawyer on the other side, they kept asking for things that would be very traditional in a settlement agreement. One, for example, being the terms would be confidential, and and I was like, yeah, the client's not going to go for that. And I kept conveying these various things to the lawyer on the other side, and he would he would take them and go away, and I ended up having to have a call with the legal department with his client. So he was on the phone. I was with the company that I was adverse to, and said exactly the same things that I had said to him, but apparently they didn't believe him when he was saying it because then when I was there and I was like, yeah, it's not going to happen, that it's going to be confidential. They were just like, and there was just like dead silence on the other end of the phone. It's just beyond their ability to understand how it was possible another big one is, well, can't I just give them a lot of money to make it go away? Well, no, actually, that's not going to work. And it was just and I had not realized sort of how far I had come until I had this conversation with someone who is like, still way back there, and completely outside of this environment, and just could not wrap their head around the things that I was telling them. It was a very entertaining conversation. So, let's see how much we're done. Time is up. Thank you so much for your questions. Appreciate it.
And people used to eat the coffee.
So how did you go from bankruptcy? I actually almost...
You're like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so I started bankruptcy in New York. So it was kind of M&A, so it wasn't super litigation. But then I moved to the West Coast, and then it was all Enron and WorldCom preference litigation, which made me want to die. So then I went in-house to Avalon, which is a technology consulting company, and they bought it. I'm like, I'm a bankruptcy lawyer, so I've seen deals that don't work out. So that'll give me valuable perspective in putting deals together. Yeah, the bottom. And then the rest is history. So then I became a technology lawyer, and then the former CEO of Avanade was the first CEO of Chef, and so he gave me a call. So bankruptcy lawyer to open source lawyer.
Will you stay? Stay for the next panel, or no? We're only like already taking it.
Get in for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and decide to talk, and see if it's that good or whatever. I can then, yes, I'm barred to open it up. Our law says that the town has to close.
Oh, is that? Boy, I'm lucky that I ran to get a coffee and I was 5 minutes late.
Yeah, not if you're a sniffer. I have to close it for hours.
Oh, I see.
So that was like my first boss.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Great, thumbs up. I'm just not gonna go with the microphone. It's like a tiny touch distorting, and yeah, you were fine. But and we have this great opportunity to have a panel on employment contracts addressing the needs of engineers and companies. Last year I gave a presentation here about employment agreements, and it generated quite a lot of interest when I asked people who had worked on an agreement specifically to tailor it for per the request of free and open source software developers. Over half the room raised their hands. So I think that sparked the interest in doing a panel this time to hear from people other than me, primarily, about what's happening in the field and some of the important issues. So we've assembled a group of great lawyers in the field, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Pam Chestic, who's not on the schedule, but she's filled in because David was unable to make it.
Pam Chestic, Chestic Legal in Raleigh, North Carolina, self-employed lawyer, solo practice.
I'm Camille Christensen of Tech Law Garden of Mountain View, California, also a solo practitioner. I represent, my practice is about 75% venture-backed startups and 25% individuals in capacities as either, founders, professors, grad student researchers who are trying to navigate the IT conflict between their universities as they're trying to start and open source developers.
I'm Andrew Hall. I have a two-person firm. My wife Lena was wandering around earlier. We'll probably see her sometime. We represent almost exclusively companies on open source issues, but open source is probably 80% of what we do, with the other 20% being software licensing. So I do offer the kind of perspective of the company when they're doing these other things.
We're doing the same thing as Pam did with her panel, and I added the link to the Etherpad from the last pad so you can click through, although I seem to be unable to connect right now. But I think that's the scale network and not the people who are trying to add Pam. But anyway, so if you are able to get on there and leave questions, we'll at least stop before the end to make sure we get to some of them. So I'm just going to ask the panelists, are employment agreements something that you're often asked to help with and negotiate? And are they, and what side are you normally participating in that negotiation? Anyone?
Yeah, so as an outside lawyer, I don't represent the companies. That's an area that they will tend to represent themselves on. They have their own in-house staff who does that, HR department does that. So when I am in that position, I am working on behalf of employees who are looking to secure date employment with the company and assisting them in sort of telling them, doing the legal reading to give them an understanding. Although again, working with open source developers, they actually really get it anyway. But to help them make sure they understand the nuances of what's going on in the agreement, and to the extent that there is something that needs to be changed, to help them try to see whether it's possible to effect a change in the agreement.
And much like my practice, 75% of the time I'm representing the company on these types of negotiations. Most of my clients are very small. They do not have an HR legal department. But when they have a developer come to them and ask questions about whether or not there's room to move, they come to me and ask if we can modify the standard employment agreement. And then the other 25% of the time I'm representing individuals.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in my intro, I work pretty much exclusively for companies, anywhere from a well-funded startup up to, we have a few Global 500 clients, but we tend to be their outside, in-house, outside, or outhouse counsel, as I like to call it, where we just manage all open source issues. So when it comes up, that's kind of how we get pulled in.
So does this come up a lot for you, Andrew? Like, is this something? So we felt like I like that how you seated yourself, because you're kind of on the spectrum from representing individual developers to representing companies.
So I would say it comes up less than it used to. So it used to be a really hot topic, or it would come up quite a bit, and I think there's a couple reasons. One is once we usually get kind of a template together for the company, they don't need us anymore. We kind of give them a framework for how to do this, how to think about it. I also think that companies are becoming much more attuned to open source contribution. A lot of them are doing it as part of their business, and so they're just much more comfortable with the topic. And so there isn't that initial, what do you mean? Okay, I've got to go get some special counsel on that. But certainly I do
provide the counter argument to that?
To what?
So the argument that if you that if you allow an employee to keep control of their or to keep ownership of a project, that it might be a detriment to their business effectively, and that's why they can't negotiate it. You want to negotiate against yourself, Pam?
Well, I mean, it would be, it is the value. I mean, it's the whole value of what's open, the value of open source and why that's a benefit to the community, which I was saving for somebody else, Pam. So.
And often, I would also add, oftentimes they're talking about contributing to an existing open source project, and so they already don't own what we're talking about. So it's really just about, hey, you're already using third-party IP. What's the difference here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very good point.
I mean, a lot of this conversation is about explaining to your potential employer, okay, when you're hiring me to do X, Y, and Z on company time using company materials, and I'm going to get this done. And part of the reason you know I'm going to get this done is that I'm good at this stuff, and this is what I do for a hobby on the side. You should not get to own it.
Yeah, Hugh Fleming in his Linux Conf Australia keynote last month or in January said that he recommends that all developers ask to keep their copyright because for projects like the Linux kernel or other distributedly held copyright projects, they're not really giving anything away. Does anyone want to comment on that? I see some thoughtful faces.
I think that's a great catch. I will use that next time.
I can see that being a really big pain in the ass in an M&A transaction, like having to disclose each and every file that the company is using but doesn't own the copyright to.
Wait, but isn't that the case now? The company is using tons of
You make employee specific representation in addition to the IP representation.
And the IP diligence team actually will go through and make sure all the employees have employee contracts, and if something's been carved out, you end up talking about that during the M&A process. So it does create a lot of work potentially for the company.
Now, if that were, this is great.
I know.
So, I mean, but I guess that there still is a very low bar towards carving out distributed ownership of free and open source software projects that are not exclusively owned by the company anyway. So I can't imagine that, do you think that?
I mean, I think it's very well understood if you can point to a third-party project that, but essentially when a company is looking at the carve-outs for the employees, they're going to ask, okay, you've been paying these employees salaries X, Y, and Z. What is the value they've been creating for the company, and justify that? And so the more you carve out, the harder it is to justify.
Yeah, I think to some extent you're already in that camp with free and open source software.
Well, you're not paying for that, right? You go and get that out of the community for free. The labor is what you pay for.
Right, but
Oh, no, I was going to say, but I guess I'm not, I feel like we're hijacking the panel here. But I don't understand the difference between what the company owns versus what the employee owns that has been contributed to an open source project that the company uses. So how does that, so if the company owns it, it still is of zero value because it's being contributed to an open source project. So how does that make a difference?
It's just not zero value, right? If they want to go enforce the copyright,
Your enforcement.
you can register it, you can enforce it. If it's incorporated into an entire project that's partially proprietary and partially not, you need to go register the copyright on that thing and say here are all the contributions that have been made by all of our employees. In some extreme examples, you would actually not own any of it because it has all been carved away. Your average VC says I'm investing this much
now a book about it, lots of books. Over where there was an employee of Mattel, is that who was Barbie? Who claimed to have designed the Bratz doll while he was on a leave of absence from Mattel, and then sold it to whoever makes the Bratz doll. And 10 years later, and God knows how many millions of dollars of litigation later, and part of that dispute was whether or not Mattel had a claim to that work that he did, and it always strikes me because it's always something I look at when I look at employee agreements because there was a reference to a time period, but it wasn't clear whether they were talking about a period of day or a period of employment. So and so they litigated, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars litigating that single point. But if you're talking about everything that I do while I am employed by you, but that's a pretty big reach. Everything you do is at home. But on the other hand, the flip side of that is there are also cases that recognize that software development in particular is not a 9-to-5 job. And so if you try to say, well, it's only during work hours, that's not fair to the employer because you have employees who are working at all different times of the day, legitimately on the stuff that they're doing for the benefit of their employer that shouldn't be owned by their employer. So anyway, that one contract that always sticks in my mind, that Bratz contract, that Barbie versus Bratz with that ambiguity. Who knew?
As a category, the worst selection of contracts I see are kind of these middle person hirers that hire people as contract workers that are then treated essentially as employees for like a year to 2 years. That's a very large technology companies. Those contracts ask for way more than what the standard employment forms of a large company that they're actually becoming people to ask for.
For me, actually, I remember reviewing during IP diligence during an M&A transaction. There was one I came across where it was pretty standard, except for very often in an employment contract, you'll have somewhere where you can list out your previous items, your stuff that I own, right? And basically, it had that opportunity, but then either you assigned everything that you previously owned to the company that was related to their technology, or you licensed it to them. And so it was this grab of stuff that the company wasn't even involved in. It was just related technology you assigned to me as part of your.
Yeah, there was a case on that one too, where someone who was a professor who wound up assigning it by virtue of the faculty handbook.
Right. Yeah.
That the faculty handbook was worded in a way to reach back to take ownership of something that started outside of work. That's probably the most egregious.
I thought that was.
Yeah, I practice primarily in California, and so California Labor Code 2870 provides a really nice shield for most of my clients, and in terms of representing the individual. But yes, the list. So there's two provisions that drive me crazy when I'm working on behalf of individuals. One is this requirement that you list any and all intellectual property that you may own. It's like, do you want me to list every single email I've ever sent? Like, what is this? And then the second one, which I'm seeing much more lately, and I think is really offensive, is it's an obligation to disclose each and everything that you think you're creating on your own time using your own resources so that the company can make an independent evaluation. So usually I've been fairly successful in pushing back on that against the kind of smaller startup companies, but I don't know. If the larger companies start making it standard, I don't know how that would play out. Right now, they did not usually consider most of them.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but are you comfortable sort of outlining the general scope of the California laws because this is California PLE? I should have. I apologize. It's like a lawyer's worst nightmare when you don't pre-discuss this and then you on the panel publicly ask them to summarize them. So I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to just sort of generally talk about the shield that you were.
They have the computer. Someone could.
Yeah, you guys can look up California Labor Code 2870. It's basically just, California has a long history of protecting inventor's rights and also protecting people's right to work. And so those two concepts are embedded in our statute. And this statute says essentially no employer can require as a condition of employment that the employee has to assign intellectual property if it is created on the employee's own time using their own resources and materials, and is not, and this is the one place where it gets sketchy, demonstrably related to the reasonably anticipated research and development of the company. And so for your super big companies, that exception tends to swallow the whole, unfortunately. But for smaller companies, it's a pretty nice shield.
Yeah, you answered my question because I was going to ask what
big companies
Yeah.
are reaching because they're so concerned about blowback from them.
Yeah.
So, what is the sort of, what are the characteristics you've seen in some of the most developer-friendly contracts that you've worked on, or just come across your desk?
So I know, like, when I've worked on, I actually went back and categorized some of them. The most developer-friendly one we had was a situation where a developer actually owned the project, right? It was their code, and the company wanted to hire them to kind of take the code in a new direction that would benefit the company. And so when the developer came, he was actually, this is pretty rare, he was actually able to retain the copyright to everything he developed with the company, with the understanding that it had to be licensed under the project license and all those sort of things. But that was really, I think, the only example I saw where a developer actually was able to retain all the copyright and the stuff that he had developed.
So I would say that example I see on a non-trivial basis, and more often than not, they don't go in as employees. So they'll come in as a contractor, and there's a little more flexibility as an independent contractor to enter into kind of a arm's length business-to-business transaction where you're like, look, I'm not just an employee, I have a bunch of assets that I'm bringing pre-existing developed technology, and I will license it to you, but I'm not going to hand it to you. And they're used to other companies telling them that, right? They in-license technology all the time.
Yeah, I would say that it's the same thing. It's when they're hiring that developer specifically for that expertise, where it kind of doesn't make sense that, oh, you're hiring me because of my knowledge and skill in a particular project, for then the company to then own it. And so that's we talked at the beginning about leverage. That's the leverage when they're hiring you for that expertise. You can then negotiate that the employee gets to keep. Same thing under the terms of that license, they will only, but which is fair enough. That's,
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I think that's kind of one point I want to make is one of the areas why this area is interesting is because it is a fairness balance. It's not, the companies are entitled to get to own the value that they get from paying someone to do work. Someone's getting paid when they're getting a regular paycheck. It's not unfair for the company to want the benefit of that. So it really is this balancing act of sort of what's kind of fair for everybody in the given situation. So it's not I don't know if I've come across as being like, oh, these awful corporations trying to grab everything. It's not that at all. I think it has to be a very balanced proposition.
But I think there's a balance between, what is community in free and open source software. Sometimes community is merely a collection of companies. Sometimes community is really a collection of individuals. Sometimes, often, it's a hybrid of both. And balancing those interests and providing contracts around a healthy ecosystem wind up having different approaches.
Yeah.
What other provisions have you seen that have been specific to free and open source software? So most of you have mentioned keeping ownership of copyright. Have there been other provisions that you've seen?
Sorry. So I actually went through and categorized them, so I'll give you kind of the four general categories of the ones that I've worked on, going from the most company favorable, I suppose, to the most developer employee favorable. One contract, or one thing I see quite a lot is where the company will agree basically that any of the development of this employee will be contributed to this project under the license term, or under those terms. Going a little bit more favorable to the employee, I've seen where the employee is actually authorized to contribute that code on behalf of the company. And the problem with the first one is, okay, you've agreed to contribute it, but if you don't, is the employee going to sue the company to make them contribute it? Do they have the resources to do that? So actually authorizing the employee was kind of a step to say, whatever you develop, you can contribute on our behalf. I've also seen basically licenses going both ways. So the company says, yes, we own it, but I grant you a license to use all these developments under the MIT or some really broad, permissive open source license that enables them to go around and contribute it and put it where it needs to go. And then, of course, the other one is where the employee retains the copyright and then licenses it easily to the company, similarly under a very permissive license.
I think those are the categories.
Do you ever see anything about limiting the scope of a person's employment? For example, I know that some employees like to, or some developers will only work on free and open source software code. And I know on occasion have gotten it in their employment agreement. And maybe it's not something you're as focused on because the employee will work on these things and you're not as focused on looking at that. But
I have not seen that. I have not had that. And usually it's just part of why they're hiring you. So I think there's an assumption that, okay, you're hiring me to work on open source, I'm going to get to work on open source, but I just haven't seen that come up.
Yeah, I have,
I was going to say, just as a contractor, not as an employee, I've seen, contractors hired from specific projects.
I have seen the opposite case where there's been a disagreement between the employee and the company about whether or not something does get contributed, and at that point, that's where the employee would be protected by one of these provisions if they had negotiated for it. And on the other hand, that's the kind of example that my companies often stand by when they explain why they can't keep these provisions, because the only time it really matters is if there's actually a conflict, and if there's actually a conflict, the company's, trying to act in its own best interest.
Yeah, but it's one of these issues where I've seen developers that are savvy start asking for a little bit more, because it brings that discussion forward, because the employee has much more leverage at the time that they're signing the contract, and they have a discussion about what they're going to be working on, and there's an understanding with management. So codifying that in the employment agreement is very helpful from the get-go for them, because otherwise the only time the company sees it is when it's a disagreement, and therefore looking back they want to grab back, but at that point the leverage is gone from the employee.
And that's a totally valid point. We're going to talk about this more on the other panel, but I think there's somewhat often of a mismatch of expectations around how all this stuff works and is going to work between the people who are sitting in the board meeting and voting and the people who are like hiring the engineers.
In that will employment situation though, I mean, like, let's say I hire you to learn to work exclusively on Linux, and then a year later say, you know what, I want you to work on this little proprietary project over here. Even if your contract says I'm only going to work on Linux, I mean, I guess it could be okay, well, we fire you, right, if you don't want to do it. But I wonder if, I'm always reluctant to rely on contracts and agreements because they're so clunky and they're so hard to enforce and it's so painful that I wonder how valuable it would be. It's always better to have it codified than not, of course, right? But I wonder how that would actually play out in practice.
Well, by your argument, you can just renegotiate the employment agreement at any time. So,
I actually help support that. Like, there's definitely folks who, it is up for renegotiation, and as long as the market's hot.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things on my list to ask about. Do you see contract renegotiations happening often? And if so, in what kind of context? Tied to,
Comp all the time, but that doesn't involve legal usually. I've seen a few explicit open source negotiations. I've also seen a very common thing in my practice is when someone wants to start another company, but they know they're working at this company for at least another 12 months to 16 to 18 months while they're funding kind of their other company, and so they want to carve out the other company. They want their employer to be on board with that and know that they're doing this on the side, and they don't want any potential conflict in the future if they're going to go try to raise money.
do you see folks renegotiating some of these more developer-friendly terms around ideology, or just about particular either copyright holdings or anything like that, sort of as another form of like balancing compensation negotiations?
So this is like company policy towards this sort of stuff?
I'm just sort of asking if you, in I guess realistically, I think it's more for Danielle and for Pam who are representing individuals, because you would necessarily see, you wouldn't see this from a company perspective, more representing individuals. You would see the life cycle of when these employees are trying to renegotiate their contracts. Are these contract provisions sort of another thing in the mix of compensation that people could renegotiate, or does it come up incidentally?
I've only seen it come up when someone's role fundamentally changes. A really common scenario is I'm sick of working here. I'm gonna go just work on some open source on my own time and spend 6 months figuring out what I want to do next. And the employer's like, no, please stay. We'll modify your contract. You can totally work on the open source and just help us fix bugs that come up that you know stuff about or whatever. So that's where I tend to see it.
Yeah, I haven't done any renegotiation currently.
Have you done any, can you
out on the traditional employee independent contractor distinction, and part of the reason why someone gets more and more towards the independent contractor status is if they own the IP or have created a lot of the IP and are going to be, you know, making their own kind of schedule or plan on working remotely from wherever in the world they're going to be because they're going to be giving talks. Like, the more they start looking like someone who's controlling their own time and not someone who's being told where and what to do, the more likely they are to be an independent contractor. But, you know, I think most companies have a preference. Most companies are on the up and up, have a preference for employees.
Agree. Yeah.
I guess I've seen both. I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of companies that try to push all or as many employees as possible to contractors.
That's why I said on the up and up.
I knew you were hinting at it, but I was hoping that someone could talk a little more. In the description of the panel, the organizers of this track promised that we would discuss the consequences to companies were they to overreach in their agreements, but also to behave, you know, not on the up and up.
Yeah, I mean, if you mischaracterize your independent contractors, your employees as independent contractors, then you know, there's labor law claims, there's, you know, potential tax clawbacks from the government, there's penalties, there's potential class action lawsuits. There are plenty of companies that have been hit by this, but, you know, sometimes aggressive CFOs in particular really try to push the line on classifying people as independent contractors instead of employees so that they don't have to deal with the overhead of employees on the benefit side, et cetera.
I tried asking a question.
I was actually just going to say, I was just able to reload.
Perfect. Well, in that case, go ahead.
So there is one question on the, and now I'm able to be connected, so if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them there. The question is, what is the best practice for flawed disclosure requirements, and how do you make sure that disclosure carve-outs actually work?
This is from the company perspective? That's not your question.
No, mine was actually related to what about hiring people located abroad and selecting them as a contractor versus employee given their geographical status?
That is a risk balancing equation that
That's what I thought.
that the companies have to undergo. I would say there is a trend right now in Silicon Valley for international folks to try to be classified as independent contractors, and often companies will work with these individuals to help them set up, you know, the local equivalent of an LLC, and help them set up their own legal entity so that they really do start to look like a company that is that's contracted with the company under an independent contractor relationship, as opposed to complying with local employment laws. That being said, you know, again, mischaracterizing your employees is likely to result in some legal liability, and the issue with international employees in particular is, unless you go talk to an employment lawyer in whatever jurisdiction you're dealing with, you don't know. You don't even know what the employment test is.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I see as well. And it is kind of that local employment gets tied into something where you have an obligation to employ them for so long, or you have to pay them afterwards. And so I definitely see the trend towards contracting, unless there's a local office, right?
favoring positions where, if you're helping them negotiate more than one contract. So that's very blanket, so if anyone wants to go into step up.
I did want to mention, I looked it up to make sure I had it correct, but GitHub has what they're calling the Balanced Employee IP Agreement, and it's on GitHub. You can Google it and find it, or you can search on GitHub and find it, which is an effort. This was as I understand it, was a company initiative to try to strike a better balance between the employee and the employer, which I just sort of thought that was a remarkable move by a company who has a lot of clout, who could take as much as they want from their employees, but they're making a judgment call. I have no doubt it's in their fiscal interest. It's in their fiscal interest, right? The employees pushing back, they may want this. But at any rate, I think it's. I just wanted to mention that it's out there, that GitHub sort of you can make contributions, you can make suggestions to the agreement. But it is. But I just thought it was an interesting. So to me, it was a sign that the balance is tipping. That employees are companies are understanding the value of giving some employees latitude, particularly around open source, but around their own work.
I would also add, like the Twitter Innovators Patent Agreement, which is now a few years old, but similarly, and I think you're right. I think a lot of it's a recruiting tool, right? It's just about trying to attract the best talent and reassuring people who
work on open source projects. I want to make sure that I can continue to do that in the same way that I've done it before. But the other is I'm being hired specifically to work on this open source project, and yet the company wants to own the copyright of the code. So in this second situation, I think the selling point is, sort of antithetical to the whole the system that is built on, that this is built on. Why do you appreciate the value of giving away the source code, and yet you insist on taking it away from me? So that's sort of like an argument that someone's being two-faced. If it's to preserve your ability to own the copyright in what you've created for yourself, that's just a fairness argument, and that's more about, I think, just really being very careful to constrain what that definition is of what is the work that will be owned by your employer, and make sure to carve it out. And I have seen, and if it is, assuming that most employment agreements have this sort of, Schedule A, what is it that you own? Being very thorough on that, like not, I've seen one that it's so funny, I probably had like 200 projects listed on it because they were very good at it. It was very smart of them to do that, but but to just be really careful, I do worry that people in the excitement of getting hired aren't careful enough to document, mostly because they read a lot of lawsuits, look through a lot of case law, and always it's like, they claim to have owned it, but then they go to Schedule A and it's blank, so just getting people to understand how significantly important it is to, and then I think on that one, there's the issue of sort of your ongoing work. But if you disclose that, I worked on the Selenium project brief prior to my employment, that you could, I would put on the schedule, and all future contributions to the Selenium project to be, to have it documented somewhere that this is just also going to be an ongoing thing. So at least you have something that has, something you can kind of point out and say, I continue to own that work that I've done outside the scope. It is clearly outside the scope of my employment when I make these contributions.
Yeah, I think the schedules are
provided that they follow the principles or some covenant. Is that how do you think that would fly with your clients?
I think they would ask why you can't get everything you need with a license. So I think that when it really comes down to should the employee keep the copyright or not, I think at the most basic one, when I have this conversation, it comes down to why do you think we need to own the copyright? What is it you want to do with the copyright? And usually we can get to the point where we can structure a license so that do everything we want to do with it.
And I'm wondering even like what that would look like. So it would be contingent ownership. So if you use it properly, the ownership would go back to the company, or?
No, it's a representation in the employment agreement.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the breach of that representation doesn't have much value on the company's part.
Right. I mean, what am I gonna?
They're not going to go get the employee, so.
But on the flip side, it does address the concern which you had said earlier about if you allow individual employees to keep their copyrights, the only value they have is within enforcement. Or not the only value, but we talked about that, sort of as a balancing act. And so this is sort of a retort to that to say, well, yes, the project is distributedly held anyway, so the company doesn't hold all of their copyright or all of the copyright in this particular project that they're using. So one employee holding their copyright in that project is, as Q Loving positive, it's not much to give away, except that you're enabling that employee to do enforcement. And so by having them do principles enforcement and potentially having a covenant about that enforcement against the employer or a variety of other permutations is a possible way to address this.
Sure. The problem is it'll be a contractual remedy, which is not as valuable as a property remedy. But I can certainly see people, particularly companies that are entirely built on open source software, feeling very comfortable that they can trust the representations of the people in the community who are making these representations and going forward with that route. I think again, most of my clients would say, well, do you actually want to do enforcement? And if the answer is yes, then that would be a different conversation with the employee. But I think Jennifer had.
Oh yeah.
I'm struggling a little bit. As an employer, I represent the company. I'm totally fine with kind of a micro conversation here where developers want to have these stuff. I totally support that. Where I would struggle as an employer or representing an employer is how do I manage the exceptions for finances, for evaluation, for M&A? And you guys touched on that a little bit earlier, but for me, that's a more macro conversation, which is individually less free, but how would this impact my valuation? Escrow, if we go to IPO or we have an M&A, and you're getting best practices for tracking all of that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you want to track it, right? I think you also want to be able to explain up front. I mean, when you're looking at it from an IPA perspective, usually it's have you secured the rights you have that you need. And so the ability to say, yes, we let them retain the copyright, but it's a third-party project, and we've gotten an additional license to use it from the developer. So even if they bailed on us or tried to get funky, I have an MIT license to it. I can continue to use it under that, something like that. A lot of times that will solve it'll be effective enough for the acquirer to say, okay, we're comfortable with that. But I think having that already as opposed to trying to construct why it's okay once they discover it in an employee agreement is a huge deal. When you go into as a company being invested in or being acquired, you do want to have a very succinct, you want to be able to identify all of those, you want to be able to have a reason why it's not a problem, why it doesn't prevent you from being able to run your business, right?
And I think you're summarizing the main kind of reticence that I think most of my venture-backed companies have towards having this individual conversation multiple times, because there's already so much overhead in hiring people, and adding this to that conversation slows things down. And there's got to be a pretty compelling argument for increased value for the company to take on those additional resources and these additional tasks. And I haven't heard that argument yet. I haven't seen anyone get up there yet.
And this is exactly why we're working on contract patch, because the idea is that we have these standardized clauses and that companies can make a policy decision, which is to say when we have an employee we want to recruit particularly hard, we're willing to give this and this provision, never this provision, sometimes, and that way they have a policy. The provisions are standardized across different companies, and what they're doing with it, and that because this is a topic that is of value to the prospective employees that they want to recruit, the rationale for it becomes much easier to explain and track.
I love the patch idea. I also love the idea of kind of cataloging which companies might actually be using this stuff, because especially for kind of up and coming companies, nothing is more convincing to say this is what Twitter does, or this, you know, this company made a patent pledge, and you know, you want to do, oh, Facebook did it, okay, I'll do it too. So very often having other examples in the industry where they've done this and it hasn't resulted in a total meltdown is going to be very convincing.
I caution people for going down that road. A long time ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, Tesla actually made like a huge patent pledge.
I remember.
And then they didn't actually roll it out. And for, 2 years, I had a lot of people coming to me saying, well, Tesla's doing it, should we be doing it? And I'm like, I don't know that they're going to do it. And it hasn't ever happened. And then it turns out, finally they announced that they actually weren't going to. And with these, I am cautious with public statements from large companies because the actual rollout of those policies are very different than the open public statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, or Elon tweeted it or something like, we're not going to sue anybody for using our patent. There wasn't really much follow-up to it.
Yeah, but I know, offhand, I know of a few major companies that will allow their rock star developers to keep their copyright, but I wouldn't be able to publish that in a list currently.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely happening.
Yeah.
It's for sure happening. Yeah.
So far, the conversation
tried to license kind of blended commercial open source software to large companies. They now have open source policies that require that all of your open source be, as far upstream as you can get it. And many of these projects, in order to get the code upstream, you have to sign the CLA or the CA. And so, again, the process is sort of solving this problem for you. And, do we worry about it with respect to the employment contract? Probably, in a lot of these cases, probably not. It's probably just happening, and the company has implicitly signed off on it because they're the ones who directed you to make the contribution.
It could. I think, and I've seen, impact more the company's decision of whether to contribute. I've seen companies hesitate when they have to assign it. That's where I kind of see that issue come up. Is, oh, wait a minute, do we want to assign ours? And, a lot of companies that have worked with, like a grant back clause that, allows the company to continue using their contribution under a different license. But that's where I see that come up more, is the decision of whether to contribute to a particular project.
So we have just 2 minutes left. What advice would you give to a lawyer who is working in the free and open source software space but gets pulled into some of these employment law contract questions? What very quick advice would you give them? Anyone?
Hire good employment.
Yeah.
A lot of times they are very employee-related issues, so you do need employment counsel. I think a lot of times, I don't know about you guys, but with the open source stuff, I'm more trying to help the company understand what they're giving away or what they're permitting and whether or not that's important to their technology or the problem. So issues like, hey, this is third-party code anyway, maybe we don't care that they're going to give it away.
I would say, have very detailed conversations early before you accept the offer. Make sure you know what you think you're getting, and then, take the email that says what you think you're getting, and ideally get a lawyer to help you make sure that's in the contract. But if not, get yourself comfortable that this list of things that you think you got is somewhere in this document.
Yeah, I would say, from the employee side, I would say it may seem like a lot of money to hire a lawyer, but it's money well spent. And probably not as much as you think to hire a lawyer to make sure that your interests are protected, because that wordsmithing can be very critical in how it's done. So, yeah, get a lawyer, have a lawyer help.
I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're going to take an hour break. Those of you who are registered for the legal track have pre-registered for it. We're going to be providing lunch, so please stay here, and lunch will be arriving shortly. And then you can grab it and go enjoy the outside for an hour, and we'll start promptly at 1:30.
I have no idea. It said to an hour when we sat down, and then it timed out because I never started it because it was too long for. Okay. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was
Yeah.
great. I admit I was fishing a little. Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, that was very useful. I do a lot of employment agreements and contractor agreements, and I know those questions come up. We also deal with acquisitions of software from developers who are more like aces or special, skilled people in a particular field from like hardware engineering.
Yeah.
So
That's actually the best way to give you one really good one.
that's what I'm trying to learn. I'm getting there.
Leverage is so important. And if you are the right rock star and you have the right expertise, like you can demand it.
Yeah, right. The company I work for, I guess, uses my skills because I'm kind of a jack of all trades and stuff. So, they do take good care of me. Can't say that they don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, so are you located in California?
Yeah, we're in the Bay Area.
I see.
Well, and also, I worked for about 9 years for Mars Red Bull.
Right.
When they were big.
Cooley.
Yeah, Snooki Martin is the one in Southern
I
California.
deal with them in Southern California on a tobacco. I dealt with them last year on a tobacco trade.
Okay. And also,
Dealt with them, not as much, not as for anything that formal. That'd be cool. All good stuff. Yeah, I'm located in Colorado.
given the tools, a lot of times if it's kind of not necessarily issue or something, it's just hard to even know how to structure it.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lot of companies they want to give it, okay, sure, I want to give it to you. I want to know how to do it, right?
Right.
How do we
carve off that little bit
Yeah.
you're asking for and not just make the management? He doesn't quite understand the nuance of things.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So that's why I kind of give like a little bit of flavor and hey, try this,
Yeah.
that works.
I usually have a prior or triage of options.
Yeah.
No, that's cool, man.
Yeah. Open source gives you this opportunity to kind of not very developed issues. I haven't tried to come up with a way. If you're not, if you're just talking about like software licensing, that book's been written, right? Like you figure out how it does it, and you just gotta go learn that. It's fun to once you have to think through.
Right. And that's why I got into this area of the law, because not just open source, but intellectual property stuff in general before I went to law school, because I knew there's lots of stuff to be said.
Property law is pretty well written, but
Yeah, that's right. IP law, on the other hand, especially consider. I guess I got into it maybe 10 years after the DMCA was written. So, I thought at the time there was a lot of stuff still to be clarified.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has since.
And then we even see the target moving a lot. Like invented that, and all these sort of things where it's constantly tweaked, but you still see that sort of shifting in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, that's right.
Like courts and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that moves at a snail's pace.
Yeah.
Not to say that the law moves at a fast pace, but IP law at least seems to be ahead of the curve.
And there's so often subject matter, the technology moves so fast that even if you've kind of settled it and figured it out, okay, now what do we do with distributed networks and LimeWire? How does that affect distribution?
Yeah,
right?
right.
So a lot of times the technology changes and stuff are getting solved.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and I like that. I work for a VPN company, one of the sponsors, private internet access.
I am a paying member. I have been for many years.
I can tell you, as a lawyer, they do what they say. Great. Very cool. We appreciate that. But yeah, a lot of that stuff is pretty new. We've done, we've even had to, argue a little bit of the U.S. versus Microsoft case currently pending in the Supreme Court. Involving some of these questions. Being on that cutting edge.
That's a great company. I love TIA. I've been a member long customer.
I will let my people know whatnot. I'll appreciate that.
That's why my touch is saw the little green guy. That's the icon to see like on my phone. I'm like, okay.
And it's funny too. I was hoping during the trademark discussion, we have private internet access trademarks on supplemental registry. So we're trying our best to, right. So what we're going to do is petition the EPA to actually done the right number of studies and whatnot to show secondary meaning. So it's kind of a tough endeavor, but I was curious because in my opinion, if you're just trying to get a word, it's going to be a tough one to use. It'll be fun. It'll be a learning experience. So does yours come to any patent stuff also, or is it just licensing software? I mean, I would probably do that too if I were in the Bay Area.
So just licensing and really mostly open source. I thought patent litigation, being a transactional attorney might be to men wing. And it's been about 4.5 years. But it's more
you have a CS background? How come you didn't try to also get on the patent level, or did you?
I knew I didn't want to process that. Right. I found it incredibly dry. I originally thought that's why I was going to do it.
It is dry. Right.
And then during my interning, nobody actually worked on one. I was like, oh my god, I should get out. It's killing me. I actually liked litigation. Yeah. It was the lifestyle that I didn't want to live.
Yeah. Agreed.
But I found that more enjoyable. And so once I kind of knew I was going to do litigation, I wasn't going to do prosecution. I never got around to it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't surprise me.
But it's a good selling point. It would have been a good idea to be able to list it on your card or something, right?
I think we used it more to have a wide appeal to more companies. There's a lot less software, a lot more engineering going on, in the Front Range area and whatnot. That's why I want to be able to use both. It applies both. But that's why I was curious, what other people do, especially given that you've got the real formal background that you pull that off.
Yeah. I was an electrical computer engineer, so
Perfect.
I think it was just that I knew that I never wanted to do prosecution, so I didn't want to give people ideas.
Yeah, right.
Oh, you're never been a jury.
Hello. We got an idea right here.
I like being able to say, no, not a patent.
Yeah, right. Talk to a specific person.
Yeah.
And that's reasonable, especially as software and patents kind of change in reality in some of the other cases.
Yeah.
That totally makes it less palatable from a resources perspective.
I find that ideally to avoid an open source enforcement, software licensing is like a deep enough pool that I don't even want to wade into the pool to make sure you even master it.
Yeah, right.
So I'm almost happy to let it go. I know how to do that.
Yeah, no,
Calling
I
me a
understand.
software partner.
Yeah, right. Then maybe we could talk. I try to stay out of it, just let my agent do it, and I handle the legal aspect of it.
Sure.
Either just the filing, dealing with the executives. But no, I think that's cool, man. I said if I were in the Bay Area, I'd certainly push software a ton.
Well, it's one of the few places you can do it. Like, I firmly believe that being in the Bay Area is probably one of the only places that really needs open source.
Yeah,
I have no clients who need open source help. I have all the work I need.
Yeah, right.
Just trying to do that in Atlanta, something like that. I'm not sure there's something there.
Yeah, I could definitely tell you. No, there isn't enough based out in Korea, but they had a presence in Austin, because I lived there. That's where I lived.
Oh, you went to UT?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
UT for undergraduate, Oregon for law school.
Very
So,
yeah.
what is it? UC Berkeley of the North. Of
Yeah.
Oregon. So, but, I worked at Tucson. They had a corporate counsel that I kind of liked, but he was definitely more old school and end-note software side of things. So that kind of prompted me to be like, there seems to be a lack of supply of these people. And I could do it. And so I was like, I'm going to try that. Sure enough, it worked.
Yeah, I ended up down there working for National Insurance.
Oh, yeah. Formerly TI. Right? Isn't that it? Or a competitor?
NI.
Okay.
They went by NI.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought they eventually changed names, but I don't know. I haven't lived there since 2005. It's been a while.
I was there from like 2001 to 2003.
Okay. Yeah, that was when I was working at EA.
It's a good town. I loved it there.
It's nice, but as I said, now that I've lived elsewhere, because I had only lived in Houston from there, and anything was Houston.
Right.
But after living in, Oregon, now Colorado, and spending a lot of time in Los Angeles, I kind of like these other options on the West Coast stuff.
I agree. And it's always a caveat when people are talking and they're asking about, I heard something in this. It's like, it's liberal for tax.
Right. But I would say libertarian.
Right.
Let's finish out the last comment.
But I feel like it is an oasis, but it's an oasis in the middle of the desert.
Right. Try going to Williamson County. Try going to Not like Austin anymore. Yeah, you can get good barbecue there, but that's about it.
Oh man, nobody knows what a good brisket is. Only
I get
Texans
it.
know how to deal with
I
brisket.
get it. And this is one of those situations where sadly I use when it's Curtis Gold Belly, I think it's one of those food services where you can get it delivered or whatever, like from Franklin's or whatever. Or Gold Belly? That's what it's called. Yeah, my wife found it one day for Christmas. She was like, we got Christmas holiday treats from New York.
Great idea. So they get it prepared from there?
Basically it's like, that's it. They get the order or whatever, then they send it to the restaurant. The restaurant then overnights it in dry ice or whatever when you get it. And literally they've got stuff from LA, delis that are badass, stuff like Texas barbecue, great New York, cheesesteaks and all that other stuff. And so every once in a while we'll splurge.
Sure.
Like, I want that, whatever brisket this week.
Salt Lake
Let's
brisket.
get it. Yeah. They'll deliver it.
County line.
It's potentially worth it if you have that desire and you can throw down.
Franklin's, I think, came out after I left.
Yeah.
And I know crazy people, and so what blows my wife and I is like people wait in line in Texas because there are so many great barbecue places.
I know.
What is it about this one? Are they putting crack in there?
Well, okay, so here's what I learned after reading an article. Most briskets use like just not a USDA prime, they use like something else or whatever. I don't know what. I'm no brisket. Right? But I read that they were one of the first to use prime brisket or whatever versus like I don't know what the other styles are. So if that's the case, okay, maybe that does explain. So, but as I said, I'm no cook or not.
You said you're in Vegas or LA?
Oh, I'm in Colorado.
Oh, Colorado.
I live right by Boulder.
Okay.